Now we're going to open it up for Q&A with Dr. Dove. If you have any questions, I have 2 mics on either side here that you can step up to and start asking questions.
I was wondering if you guys have come to find out what the longevity, the lifespan of this shark is. That's the first question. And the second question is to the regenerative power that it has. I mean, I've heard of, I'm not sure what ocean or sea, but something like those super jellyfish that exist, which are really astounding and are mind-boggling because they're able to regenerate to an extent from death almost. So I just had those 2 questions for you.
Well, the first question about how long they live, nobody knows. It's another one of those basic bits of biology that we haven't got our arms around yet. There are some models that suggest maybe 75 years. That seems reasonable to me for an animal that's that large, and they delay maturation until they're quite big. So it seems to make sense to me that once they've reached a mature size, that they're going to stay that way for a long time. There are 2 life history strategies in the world. We call them rabbits and elephants. The rabbits produce lots of babies. They don't care for them very much. They do it really quickly. The elephants take ages, but they look after their kids for a long time. And I think whale sharks fall into that second category. To your second question about the regenerative powers, I don't know what the basis of regeneration in whale sharks is. I hope in the genome work that we're doing with Emory, we might find some genetic basis for wound healing, because wound healing is a huge problem in human medicine, and if there's a genetic basis for it in whale sharks, a better understanding of that might help us understand wound healing in humans as well.
Thanks.
No problem.
My question is, in regards to like the conservation aspect, do you think it's responsible to increase production or our production capacity for offshore drilling in regards to the conservation aspect, the environmental aspect?
That's a good question. What impact does offshore drilling have on conservation of species like whale sharks? I think there's a good side and a bad side to that story. The good side is that whale sharks appear to be attracted to oil platforms. In fact, it's one of the most reliable places to see whale sharks in the northern Gulf of Mexico and in the Arabian Gulf is to go to the oil platforms. You'll find fish hanging around, and you'll find whale sharks hanging around there as well. However, obviously, if it's going to lead to things like the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, well, then that's the flip side. And I can't say in good conscience that that's a good idea because I'm pretty sure that that interrupted their life history pretty severely for a while. So I have mixed feelings about it. And I really would love to, this is going to be the scientist answer, right? I'm going to tell you we need more data. That's what scientists always say, need more data to help understand this problem. My gut says it's probably got mixed good and bad effects. You got another follow-up question?
Like in response to that, do you think we should be erring more on the side of caution as opposed to just going forth and then we clean it up later?
I think that's an excellent attitude. In fact, what I would really like to see is to see us getting away from a carbon economy altogether so that we don't have to be drilling for more fossil fuels in the Gulf of Mexico. I would love to see us doing more with renewable energy sources, but realistically that change isn't going to happen quickly. And in the meantime, there are needs for energy sources, unfortunately. So you have to be a bit pragmatic about it as well.
Hi. Firstly, I'd like to say I've been to see that aquarium, and it's absolutely awesome.
Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. And then I had 2 questions. One, do you think that that regenerative effect is entirely different than an anti-anything? An antibiotic, an antifungal, is the reaction a different process?
I really don't know. I can tell you it's really, really quick. I mean, it would seem like a wound like that is just prime for a secondary infection, right? To get a nasty bacteria invading that wound. That doesn't seem to happen. Maybe one of the things that helps them is that whale sharks and sharks in general are not sterile on the inside. We don't have bacteria living within our bodies, except for within our gut. But whale sharks and other sharks have bacteria that live within their tissues. It's a normal part of their bacterial flora. I have no idea whether those bacteria help them in their wound healing process. The bacteria are there to help them regulate urea concentrations in their blood and tissues, But it's kind of weird. It's a hard thing for us to wrap our head around that they have bacteria in their tissues as a normal part of their biology. Maybe those are involved in the wound healing. Or maybe it's just not so bad for them to have bacteria in their tissues because they have it all the time anyway. But we really don't understand anything about the wound healing, and I would love to think that we can understand that better over time. Unfortunately, we're not going to do it with the animals we have in the aquarium because that would involve wounding them and then measuring their recovery. So we're stuck with studying it in wild animals and looking in the genome for clues about maybe how they do this.
Then keeping them alive for a longer time might be very important to chemists as much as it is to the ecologists. Then.
It would be. You had a second question?
Yes, I do. Dolphins seemed to follow my daughter even though she didn't have any fish to give to them. You know, the thing is to give them fish and they come running. Mm-hmm. And she just wanted to jump in the water. She was like 1.5 years old, and she wanted to literally jump in with the dolphin and go swimming. Didn't know how to swim though, so we were very careful about that.
Yep.
Took her to a lower window where, like at the aquarium, she could look at those dolphins, and they literally, several of them swam up and hovered around the window saying hello to her.
Yeah.
Is their communication postural, or is it something else?
In
that they're
dolphins
responding
or
to?
in whale sharks? You mean in dolphins?
No, whale
In whale
sharks,
sharks.
relating to that, seeing that, okay, we give that sanctions, they're so smart to
Yeah.
dolphins. Is it similar?
No, it's not. I can tell you, having held the brain of a whale shark in my hand, it's about that big for a 5,000-6,000 pound animal. Very small brain, almost completely given over to their olfactory lobes. So almost all of their brain is devoted to smelling things,
Okay.
which is really important if you have the job of finding food in the open ocean, which is a pretty big place.
Yeah.
So we think probably most of their brain power is given over to processing sensory information that comes into them. We've seen no signs in these big aggregations or in the aquarium that they're particularly interested in interacting with each other. Mm-hmm. Presumably that has to change at some point when they're ready for procreation, but we haven't seen that either. But for the most part, these aggregations, there's no sign of social behavior at all. They're not there to interact with each other. They're there because food densities are high and they all are converging on the same place where there's lots of food. You dish out a lot of chow, a lot of people are going to show up to eat it. That's the same with whale sharks. So we don't think that there's a lot of social behavior in these species, and I suspect that most of the time they're pretty solitary.
Thank you very much.
No problem, my pleasure. Sure. You guys gonna go ahead?
Human leukocytes, there's different kinds of white blood cells that are used for different things. Is it the same for whale sharks? Like, if they have a certain type of infection, does a certain type of white blood cell, is it produced differently?
Yeah, we don't know anything about the functional biology of white blood cells in whale sharks. That first paper that we wrote describing each of the different cell types is the only paper that exists about whale shark blood cells. I can tell you that a large motivator for the genome project that we're doing is to look at the evolution of the immune system. Sharks were the first group of vertebrates to develop an adaptive immune system. So this is the first group on the evolutionary tree to fight off disease using antibodies. And so there's a very important, if you want to look at the evolution of the human immune system, sharks are a great place to start. And we've been working with a group at Emory that specializes in that, and they look at the difference between the genes for whale sharks and the genes for hagfish, which is their model species of a jawless fish that has a quite different immune system. But functionally, we don't know those white cells that I described. They're described on purely what they look like. We call them eosinophils because they're pink. We call them basophils because they're blue. That's what these terms mean. It doesn't tell you anything about what those cells do. We can guess based on what they do in other animals, and they may well prove to be right, but honestly, we don't know.
They could pretty much be used for anything.
Yeah. We do know that sharks have several different antibody classes that are not present in other vertebrates. So there's a good chance that their lymphocytes are producing different antibody classes. And there's lots and lots of work yet to be done. I hope that if we're able to get a steady supply of blood samples from the animals in the collection, that we can work with immunologists to help characterize how that works. It's a really interesting field.
Thank you.
No problem.
If they have a good sense of smell, how far could they smell?
That's a good question. How far can they smell? We suspect over not a very great distance. We've done a little bit of work in the aquarium where we create plumes of odor molecules in the water and then look at how the whale sharks respond to that. And they really only respond within a couple of yards, a couple of meters of the plume that you create. That leaves us with another question. How do they find food on a much bigger scale? It's one thing to find food that is maybe a few meters away. It's another thing altogether to try to find food that's hundreds of kilometers or hundreds of miles away from where you are. How do they find that? It's still a great mystery. We really don't know. Isn't that cool, though, that we don't know, and there's still so much cool stuff out there yet to discover? Maybe you can find out for us in a few years' time. Get out there and do some experiments.
I have two questions.
Sure.
The first one is it a popular, like, are whale sharks a popular thing to study? And do you know what attacks whale sharks?
So the first question, are whale sharks popular to study? Not really, but getting increasingly so. And I hope to find out a lot about who's studying them when we're going to host the 3rd International Whale Shark Conference at the aquarium in October. And I hope to meet everybody else from the World Whale Shark Research community, because you might think from that steep part of the graph that there's a lot of people who are coming into the field and have just learned that the species is really interesting, me included. I didn't start studying whale sharks until after the last International Whale Shark Conference. So I'm a newbie too, and I've got a lot of people to meet and learn about. And the other question you had was what we...
What do you know what attacks?
Do we know what attacks them? Okay, natural enemies for the whale shark. Once they get to this sort of size, well, no, one, okay? It's us. We're the biggest enemy for whale sharks of this size. But in terms of natural enemies, no, not really. Once you get to that size and your skin is that thick and that tough, there's really nothing that can take you down. So what whale sharks do when they're young is they engage in a really interesting growth strategy. It's called gape evasion. You grow really fast when you're really young. And every inch that you put on when you're little means that you outgrow the mouth of something else that wants to eat you, right? So the faster you can grow, the more length you can put on, the bigger you get, and the faster you get there, the more predators you can avoid simply by virtue of not fitting in their mouth. It's really simple logic, but it actually works really well. And so that's probably one of the reasons why they delay maturation until they're really big, because their early life is all about getting as big as you can, as fast as you can, so you can avoid all the things that want to eat you. But once they get to this size, even a tiger shark taking a bite out of this is going to get nothing but gristle, because that skin is so thick, and even though they've got a big mouth and tough teeth, they're really not going to get a lot out of that. Most of the injuries we see on whale sharks can be attributed to boats and not other animals.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
This has been fascinating, thank you. I wanted to ask you if you could tell me a little bit about your educational background and how you got involved in studying whale sharks.
Sure. Well, that's a kind of an interesting story. So the question is, what's my educational background and how do I come to be studying whale sharks? Well, I did a Bachelor of Science in Biology at the University of Queensland. I was always interested in marine biology, but actually I really wanted to study parasites. Somewhere along the line I got really fascinated with parasites, tapeworms, flukes, all sorts of gross, nasty things that infect everything. Everybody else thought that was gross. I thought it was awesome. Couldn't wait to study more of it. I know Edwin loves this sort of stuff too, so we parasitologists have to stick together. However, as my career developed, there weren't opportunities for me to make a career out of studying parasites, and these days I don't. I study whale sharks. But the process is the same. Scientific method, whether I'm applying it to parasites or lobsters, which I used to work on for a while, or whale sharks that I'm working on these days, the scientific process is the same, the mathematical language is the same, and so a good grounding in biology and other STEM fields is going to be a critical part of your preparation. And actually what you end up working on, the individual species, those I would class them as models, right? So right now my model species is whale shark. 5 years ago it was lobsters in Long Island Sound, and I was studying something different. Had you told me when I was at grad school that I would end up living in Atlanta, working at an aquarium and studying whale sharks, I would have laughed at you. I was pretty sure that I was going to be a university professor somewhere in Australia studying parasites in fish, and that's not what happened at all, and I couldn't be happier about that. So, sometimes careers don't go the way you plan, but there's always opportunities, and you just make the best decisions you can and try to roll with that. And if things don't work out the way you want, you've got to try to learn from those experiences and take those lessons with you. Hopefully you will find something that is your passion and you'll also get paid for, which is, let's face it, you've got to get paid too at some point. So, no problem. Go this one first. Hi. Yes. But shout it out anyway.
So you mentioned this cycle that they travel around Texas and the Gulf of Mexico. So they follow similar cycle around Australia or Japan or California or New York?
Good question. We don't really know is the short answer. We think the ones in Australia are connected to the ones in the Philippines. We think the ones in Baja California are connected to the ones in the Galapagos. We think the ones in East Africa are connected to the ones in the Arabian Gulf. But whether those populations are connected to each other on a broader scale, we just don't know yet. Part of the problem is getting those tags to stay on long enough to catalog the whole journey. Usually we get bits of the journey and we have to keep doing it over and over again, try to overlap the bits and prove ultimately that these different locations are connected. Some of that photo ID stuff can really help too, because if we take it, I'm still waiting for the magical day when I upload an animal from Yucatan, Mexico, and it tells me that that animal was seen before in Mozambique, but that's never happened. So far, every animal I see has either been seen in Mexico, Belize, Honduras, or the Gulf of Mexico. And so we think what we call connectivity on a much bigger scale, whether these groups are connected, that's going to take us a lot longer to sort that out. And it's really a global problem that we're trying to address, right? So it's going to take us a while, and it's going to take some special cooperation between whale shark scientists. I hope that's the exact kind of stuff we end up talking about at our conference in October.
Also, I have one more question. How can you guys track whale sharks? Like, how old are they in history?
We don't know. Nobody knows how old they get. Think maybe 75 years. The tags don't help us answer that question because they only stay on for about 6 months at a time. And you know, we're talking about an animal that probably lives 75 years or more, and so those tags really don't help us.
I mean, as far as like sharks supposedly were, where the dinosaurs were around and all of that.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, you're talking about on a geological time scale. Well, we think the species has been around for at least 75 million years. And so what I like to think about sometimes when I'm floating off the coast of Mexico like this and bobbing around in the ocean and photographing whale sharks, I like to think that there was a time when they were doing exactly the same behavior, and on the Yucatan Peninsula, instead of tourists at all-inclusive resorts, it was dinosaurs roaming through the jungle, browsing on vegetation. There's a very good likelihood that about 65 million years ago, that exact situation was taking place. Whale sharks looking just like that in the ocean, dinosaurs roaming around on the Yucatan, until, of course, the Chicxulub impact happened, which was the giant crater that wiped out the dinosaurs, which happened where? On the Yucatan Peninsula. So I think they're tied into the history of dinosaurs in that way too. No problem. Hey there.
Good question. At that size, what's the top speed for the whale shark?
What's the top speed of a whale shark? Not very much, actually, relative to their body size. In an absolute capacity, you can see me kicking my little pasty legs as hard as I can to keep up with these guys. They look like they're moving so slowly, but actually they move really fast, and it's pretty hard to keep up with them for more than just a couple of minutes. Mostly when they're feeding, they swim at a fixed body length per second. There seems to be an optimal speed to feed at. When they're cruising the open ocean, pretty slow. They might cover 25 miles in a day, something like that. That's what the satellite tags tell us. And when they're relaxed in the aquarium, they swim pretty slowly too. However, they can turn it on. I mean, if you irritate one, they can take off. And a few big sweeps of that tail, which is the size of a ping pong table, so that thing's moving a lot of water when it wants to, they can really burst and they can just disappear before you have a chance to even know what happened. Their favorite strategy, if they're irritated, is to go down. So they'll break from the surface, beat their tail 3 or 4 times, and they'll be 150 feet down before you know it. So they're not a real speedster. They're probably a pretty mellow, slow swimming animal, and they probably live through efficiency rather than speed and brutality. So compare that to something like a mako shark, which lives by being fast and being brutal. These guys live by being slow and being efficient. It's boring, but it works. So, thanks. Sorry, I'm going to have to get you to speak up a little bit.
Are they aggressive amongst each other since they don't reproduce often?
Are they aggressive amongst each other because they're not reproducing often? I've really seen very little signs of aggression between whale sharks, even within the aquarium. Occasionally they bump into each other, if they play this game of chicken across the fish tank where, you know, okay, someone's going to move, okay, nobody's going to move, and they will bump into each other. And we do have a behavioral observation program that we do in collaboration with people from Georgia State University, and that says that when they run into each other, there are predictable outcomes. There is a winner and there is a loser. The loser usually goes to the bottom of the tank and sulks for about 20 minutes and then gradually comes back up to the surface. But it's usually predictable. Alice wins, always. Trixie wins, unless it's Alice. And Taroko nearly always loses. He's our shy guy, and he's the one who ends up sulking on the bottom the most. So, you know, there is some evidence of predictable outcomes, but whether that constitutes real social behavior or it's certainly not aggression. They're not trying to hit each other. It's just incidental. So, and I've never seen them go after each other in the ocean. For the most part, they seem to be pretty much indifferent to everything except food. Thank you.
So you mentioned about this egg, the fish egg.
Yeah.
How far down can you look for a specific species of tuna? Would it be possible that you would carry by this water current?
What we've done is age the eggs. You can look at a fish egg and know how long ago it was laid. There are some developmental things that happen as the egg gets ready to hatch. And so usually when we run into them out there, the eggs are between 12 and 16 hours old. So they're laid almost certainly the night before, at some point during the night. We don't know when, we don't know where. I have an idea, but it's going to be hard to work it out because it's probably happening in the dead of night, and it probably happens really quickly, and it's giant, you know, reproductive frenzy, and then they're all gone by the time the sun comes up. So I hope one day we get to see it because it's got to be something pretty special. But so far, it's going to be a real challenge, I think, to pin it down. So, thank you.
Congratulations on your work.
Thank you.
And my question was, will the closed environment in the aquarium have an effect on the sharks?
That's a good question. Does the closed environment affect them? There's this idea that sometimes animals in aquariums stunt their growth. They don't grow as big because they're in an aquarium environment. We haven't seen any sign of that yet. What we have seen is that you can throttle their growth to some degree according to how much you feed them. They seem to be, as I said, very efficient with food, but they also don't seem to be self-limiting with food. They will eat whatever you put in front of them, and they will keep eating as long as you keep putting it in front of them. And that's probably an adaptation from nature, where food may be ephemeral in the open ocean, right? So patches of food here, patches of food there. So when you find a patch, you better take advantage and you better eat all of it before you drive to move on to the next patch. So in the aquarium, we had to learn to scale it back a little bit. They were growing very quickly. They were getting kind of fat. And so we had to sort of ease up on the diet. Thankfully, we have a professional nutritionist who works at the aquarium, and she's always evaluating the diets, looking at where they're deficient, looking at where they've got too much of some nutrients, because too much sometimes is as bad as not enough, and making sure that they get all of their veggies as well. So,
thank you.
No worries.
Has like a whale shark ever attacked like you or like anybody?
No. No, there are times when, just to put it simply, no, they haven't attacked us. To put it simply, the only time I've ever been hit by a whale shark was by the tail. They probably meant to do it, but it's more like the way a horse flicks its tail at a fly. They're just saying, go away, you're bugging me. But unfortunately, that tail is pretty big, and it actually stings a bit when you get hit. So generally speaking, I try to stay out of the way.
Did it push it far?
No, it's more like getting smacked upside the head. So it stings, your pride hurts for a while, and then you get over it.
How do you know if it's a female or a male whale shark?
How do you know male and female whale sharks? Well, it's underneath. If you look at where the anal fins are, so the pelvic fins down here, females have simple triangular shaped fins, and males have those same triangular shaped fins, but in the middle they have a modified part of the fin called a clasper, and it sort of looks like a cucumber. It's a very suggestive looking piece of anatomy. Perhaps cucumber was a bad analogy. I could think of a better vegetable. Maybe we should just avoid vegetables altogether. But what happens is that when they're young, when they're immature, the clasper is the same length as the fin. But as they mature, the clasper gets a lot longer. and the end of the clasp, they call it differentiating. It starts to turn into, it looks like broccoli or cauliflower on the end, very flowery looking, very highly divided, calcifies too on the end. And when you see them like that, you know. So my colleague Rafael de la Parra, every time I go to Mexico, he always pops up from, who go underneath the whale shark. That's what I'm doing here. So I'll take a photo, and then when I'm done, I'll go down and have a look at whether it's a boy or a girl. And then usually I photo it, so I'm going down to check the sex. Sometimes I'll take a picture if it's got good claspers, and then I'll usually photograph my hand, 1 for a male, 2 for a female. A fist means I don't know. And Rafael often comes up afterwards and he just says, mucho macho. He's always talking about big males. And when you find a big mature male, you know it. You put your head underneath and you're like, oh, hello. So yes, it's very easy to tell. Next time you go to the aquarium or any aquarium, and that method works with any shark and any ray. So you can impress your friends next time you go to the aquarium and you see them swim over the tunnel, you can say, it's a male, yeah. You can do that. Or a female, if you're able to tell. No problem.
Question is, did supersaturation occur? And if so, how did you guys deal with that during transport?
We deliberately supersaturate. So he's talking about dissolving oxygen in the water. And sometimes oxygen is really interesting in water. You can put, in theory, more oxygen than the water can hold in the water. That sounds counterintuitive, but for a period, you can have more than 100% oxygen saturation. We do that deliberately because it has a sedative effect, and it really mellows them out. So it's just the same as with people. If you're stressed or in shock, they'll give you an oxygen mask. You breathe pure oxygen. Okay, I'm cool now. I got it. I'm under control. Well, it's the same with whale sharks. If you give them more oxygen than they need, they do mellow out, and it's kind of nice. So we deliberately supersaturate the transport boxes for that purpose. Hey.
Well, my question was regarding when you spoke about actually transporting these animals to the aquarium. You said that you had to give them a certain time to adjust to the human interaction. How long does that normally take? Because it seems like they just, they're very kept to themselves. Like you said, you've never seen a mate, you've never seen them spawn. So how long does that normally take?
It took us, in each time we did that, it took us about 3 months to get the animals to reliably come and feed from us. And that's good because it also takes about 3 months to organize the permits and the logistics of transporting them from the other side of the world. So it's a convenient window. Some animals take longer than others. And there is a period once you get to the aquarium where they kind of give you the cold shoulder for a while. They're probably just trying to absorb their new habitat. But eventually hunger kicks in and they're like, all right, oh yeah, okay, I remember that thing. That thing's got food in it, and they come after you and they're ready. Once they get back feeding solidly again, that's always a great sign. With any animal in an aquarium setting, there's several signs that you're doing it right. If they feed from you, that's good. If they're growing, that's great. If they're reproducing, that's the best. That means you're doing it right. So we look for those signs that animals are doing. We call them species-appropriate behaviors. If they're doing species-appropriate things, then we're doing our jobs as aquarium keepers.
Thank you.
No problem. Hey.
The tractor only works for about 6 months and then it falls off. But you guys have like repeat patterns where you kind of same shark over and over. So why don't you just go to the place where it's been falling off most often and place in the tractor?
I'd love to do that, but unfortunately, when they're in those places, they're not aggregating. So the great thing about that site in Cancun, Mexico, is that it's the same place. We can go out to the same place every day and reliably see whale sharks there. And although they leave and they go into the Gulf of Mexico is a big place, and they tend not to stop and form groups again anywhere along that path, except for there is a place at the mouth of the Mississippi where they form another group. And I would really love to go there and tag some animals, and hopefully we can fill in the gaps about that migratory path. But I mean, your logic is great, and we need to go and tag them somewhere else on the loop. My other idea is, remember that animal Rio Lady that went off to Brazil? I'd love to go to St. Peter and St. Paul rocks in Brazil, tag some whale sharks there, and see if they all come back to Mexico, or if some of them go on to somewhere else. And that would really help to sort of connect the dots quite literally about where these populations are going. Thanks.
Hey, so thank you for coming in the first place.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. So my first question is, so obviously you're interested in whale sharks, but that's a really wide category. Obviously they're fascinating animals that have a lot to be explored still. So my question is, what is your particular research interest concerning these animals? Second question for the younger members of the audience, do you guys have internship opportunities in your aquarium? Maybe visiting, interacting a little bit more with the staff?
Sure.
Anything like that?
Okay, so the first question, what's my particular interest? Actually, it's pretty broad. We have a behavior program, I'm part of that. We have a genome project, I'm part of that. We have a metabolism and biochemistry project, I'm the lead PI on that. So I am, and we have a field program in Mexico, and I'm the PI on that. So I am involved in every part of our whale shark program, primarily because there isn't anybody else. I'm the whale shark guy at the aquarium, so I do it all. And sometimes it leads to a sort of scientific ADD where I'm trying to do too many different things at once, and I really need to focus on one project. But there's so much we don't know that whenever anybody approaches me and says, hey, you want to study the genome of whale sharks? I say, sure. You want to study biochemistry? Sure, I want to do that too. But eventually you've got to, at some point, you end up like that guy spinning plates at the circus, right? He's going to try to keep track of that. To your second question about whether the aquarium has internship opportunities, the answer is yes, we have internships. We also have teen internships for younger people. Most of the draw for that comes from the Atlanta metro area. But there's a lot of details on the website about how to do that. I should stress that we don't yet have internships in the research and conservation program. There are internships in husbandry where you can go and work with the animals in the aquarium setting, but I don't have internship opportunities yet in the research and conservation program, primarily because we're still growing. I just added 2 new staff members to my existing 1 staff member, so we just doubled the size of the research program by adding 2 people. So we're in a growth phase. Still a relatively young institution, and as we reach maturity, I think we'll be able to engage in more of those sorts of activities. I really look forward to it because I love to share this sort of stuff with people. That's why I'm here. So I'd love to be able to share it with interns as well. That'd be great.
I had the opportunity to visit the aquarium, swimming with the giants, Nico, the beluga whale was there. It was an exchange from Mexico. And I know that for me, perhaps it's easy to boast me, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you deeply because you have brought the aquarium to my kids.
Well, thank you.
Maybe they cannot go, but you brought.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
You cannot say, this year yes, and next year I won't.
No.
So I said, but I have 41 kids that are like curious, and they want to know in your honor. And this is also. Thank you so much.
Hey, no problem. It's my pleasure.
Also, you mentioned that some of the whale sharks died in the aquarium within the same year. What would be some of the reasons why they died?
Sure. So the 2 animals that we had at the aquarium that died, Ralph and Norton, their names were, their death coincided with an anti-parasitic treatment that we added to the exhibit. It's a standard drug that's used throughout the industry to control ectoparasites. It wasn't even an ectoparasite of whale sharks that we were trying to control. It was a leech that was infecting stingrays and other bottom-dwelling organisms. Now, at the time, we had 62, 63 species in the tank, and 2 of them turned out to be susceptible to this drug. Unfortunately, one of them was the flagship species in the exhibit. So we learned a bitter lesson about drug sensitivity. Obviously, we're never going to use that drug again to control this organism. To some degree, when you're doing something that people haven't done before, unexpected things like that are going to happen. We copped a bit of negative press for that, and that's fair enough. I mean, people are going to react whenever animals die in an aquarium setting. But at the end of the day, we solved the problem, we've moved on, we've successfully kept whale sharks ever since. I don't anticipate we'll ever have problems like that again. But at the time, we think it was to do with a drug treatment we added to the tank. Unfortunately, there's no way to directly measure it because the particular drug we were using has a really short half-life. So you add it to the tank and it's gone in 6 hours. And it doesn't leave tissue residues. So you can't find it in the tissues that were left behind. So all you can go on is the fact that all other things were equal. We didn't really do anything else different except add the medication. And shortly after we did that, the animals stopped eating. And so it's a correlation. But I think, with all other things being equal, it's a suggestive correlation. So we don't really know for sure, but we think probably the drug had something to do with it. No problem. Okay. Yes.
I'll ask you a series of questions. The diet that the sharks have in the aquarium, is it representative of the diet they have in the walleye?
It is. So the diet in the aquarium consists of 2 species of krill that we give them, Euphorsia superba, Euphorsia pacifica, 2 types of krill. We supplement that with lance fish, which is a small silvery fish, sometimes silver signs, Menidia, we give them those as well, chopped squid, and a gel diet, a manufactured gel diet that we add a lot of vegetable matter to so that they get all of the vitamins they need, and we can add additional vitamins to those. Turns out that having sharks in captivity, all species of sharks, they're very subject to thyroid problems, and so you need to make sure that you give them the vitamins so that they don't get goiter. They'll get terrible thyroid goiter if you don't give them vitamins. So it's a combination of wild caught krill, the kinds of things that they would normally eat, supplemented with a manufactured diet as well that helps. And thankfully the nutritionist is always there to analyze the diet and tell us if what we're doing is on the mark.
Now, next question. I know with orcas, they have an aquarium, they're dorsal fin, some of them over. Do you see any other rapids like that with whale sharks?
No, we don't see them, nothing like that floppy dorsal fin that you see in orcas. And I don't think that that's particularly well understood either. I'm not sure why that happens. But with whale sharks, the biggest thing that we look out for is that they're a bit kind of NASCAR. They like to stick on the perimeter and go fast and turn right. And they always go clockwise around the exhibit. We have no idea why that is, but natural whale shark behavior, natural shark behavior of any species is to stick on the perimeter of whatever tank you put them in, regardless of how big it is, stick on the perimeter and travel around it in a clockwise direction. In fact, we interpret rapid counterclockwise swimming as a sign that maybe they're stressed out about something. So what we have to do is incorporate this behavior into the design of the aquarium. So the aquarium on the west wall has this giant bit that juts out into the exhibit. And the purpose of that is to make it so that if they want to stay on the wall, they don't always turn right. So if they're going clockwise, turn right, turn right, turn right, turn right, turn right, they get to the bump, they have to turn left again to stay on the wall. That keeps them turning both directions, keeps the muscles on both sides of the body healthy, and you don't end up with twisted whale sharks. What we really like them to do is to break off the wall and do a figure 8, where they're clockwise in the north end and counterclockwise in the south end and clockwise in the north end and so on. That's perfect for us, and we look out for that. So we are trying to look after their behavior that way as much as possible.
Okay, last question.
Sure.
As far as the growth rates from wild whale sharks and the ones in the aquarium, have you seen a difference in the juveniles in the wild, whereas the ones that are maybe smaller, bigger?
Yeah, we have precious few data about that. We know that when they first came to the aquarium, they were growing about 3 to 4 feet per year in length. They no longer grow that fast in length. Most of their growth now is in volume and weight. So they're not growing, they're not increasing their linear dimensions as fast, but they're probably still increasing their weight in a linear fashion because the weight goes up as a cube of the length, if you know what I mean. In the wild, we really don't know. We've got no data about wild growth rates. So we have essentially nothing to compare it to, but we know they're capable of growing very, very quickly, especially early in life.
I just want to thank everybody for coming out, and on behalf of the graduate school at UTPA, I am very pleased with our turnout, and we appreciate you for coming, Dr. Dove. It has been a pleasure. This is a little bit of UTPA.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And thank you for everything you've done.
Yeah, it's been great. It's been great.
And I want to thank you guys for your incisive questions and the enthusiastic applause of the Ecology Club. I notice you guys in the front there, so thank you very much.